Hello, welcome to the Daily Bohm, as I am calling this. I'd like to read David Bohm's works and do so publicly. And when I say read, I mean more than just read the words off the page. I think one of the attributes about reading that doesn't necessarily get publicized as much, I guess, is that reading is really about being very active in working with the text. So when I read on dialogue here, which is one of Bohm's works, what I'm going to be doing is sort of being active in trying to figure out what Bohm means by what he's saying. So that's going to involve sort of interrogating the work and rereading passages, trying to make sure I understand something, trying to figure out what he's trying to say, and all that. So yeah, that's the purpose of this. This is the first one. I hope it goes well. Should be around 20 minutes, I think, per thing. And yeah, let's get started. So this is, again, On Dialogue by David Bohm. I'm going to skip the foreword and preface and just go straight in. This was first published in '96. So, Chapter 1, On Communication. During the past few decades, modern technology, with radio, television, air travel, and satellites, has woven a network of communications which puts together each part of the world into almost instant contact with all the other parts. Yet, in spite of this worldwide system of linkages, there is, at this very moment, a general feeling that communication is breaking down everywhere on an unparalleled scale. And I mean, yeah, this is 24 years ago, and this right now is more valid than ever. People living in different nations with different economic and political systems are hardly able to talk to each other without fighting. And with any single nation, different social classes and economic and political groups are caught in a similar pattern of inability to understand each other. Again, still very, very accurate for the modern world. Indeed, even within each limited group, people are talking of a generation gap, which is such that older and younger members do not communicate, except perhaps in a superficial way. Moreover, in schools and universities, students tend to feel that their teachers are overwhelming them with a flood of important information, which they suspect is irrelevant to actual life. Probably true in that one. And what appears on the radio and television, as well as in the newspapers and magazines, is generally at best a collection of trivial and almost unrelated fragments, while at worst it can often be a really harmful source of confusion and misinformation. So, I mean, all this still just so very prescient. Because of widespread dissatisfaction with the state of affairs described above, there has been a growing feeling of concern to solve what is now commonly called the problem of communication. But if one observes efforts to solve this problem, you will notice that different groups who are trying to do this are not actually able to listen to each other. As a result, the very attempt to improve communication leads frequently to yet more confusion, and the consequent sense of frustration inclines people even further towards aggression and violence, rather than toward mutual understanding and trust. If one considers the fact that communication is breaking down, and that in the present context, efforts to prevent this from happening generally tend to accelerate the breakdown, he may perhaps pause in his thinking, to give opportunity to ask whether the difficulty does not originate in some more subtle way that has escaped our mode of formulating what is going wrong. Is it not possible that our crude and insensitive manner of thinking about communication and talking about it is a major factor behind our inability to see what would be an intelligent action that would end the present difficulties? It may be useful to begin to discuss this question by considering the meaning of the word communication. This is based on the Latin commun, and the suffix ie, which is similar to phi, in that it means to make or to do. So one meaning of to communicate is to make something common, i.e., to convey information or knowledge from one person to another in as accurate a way as possible. That's a really interesting definition. The way to measure how accurate something, how can you actually measure how accurately you transmitted something is, I think, a really kind of open question. So I'm curious if Bohm will address that, because that's not an easy thing to actually like figure out. Excuse me. So this meaning is appropriate in a wide range of contexts. Again, this meaning is to make something common, i.e. to convey information or knowledge from one person to another in as accurate a way as possible. Thus, one person may communicate to another a set of directions as to how to carry out a certain operation. Certainly, a great deal of our industry and technology depends on this kind of communication, and kind of arguably all of it. Nevertheless, this meaning does not cover all that is signified by communication. For example, consider a dialogue. In such a dialogue, when one person says something, the other person does not in general respond with exactly the same meaning as that is seen by the first person. It's interesting that he's saying respond with exactly the same meaning. I assume that what he means here is when I respond to someone else communicating some information, I don't respond as if I've gotten the message exactly. I'm filtering it through my own lenses. Let's see. Rather, the meanings are only similar and not identical. Thus, when the second person replies, the first person sees a difference between what he meant to say and what the other person understood. And that makes a lot of sense. That sort of, if I ask a question and they appear confused, then I notice a difference between, a very large difference between, okay, here's what I said and here's what I meant. If I do something like ask them a question and they respond very confidently, but the answer is not what I expected, then I know, okay, like I'm closer to, they obviously know this thing, but I need to reword my question. And then there's much subtler differences in terms of, I can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but you can absolutely see that sort of small difference pop up. And that gives you a lot of clues as to what they're thinking when they say that. So again, thus when the second person replies, the first person sees a difference between what he meant to say and what the other person understood. On considering this difference, he may then be able to see something new, which is relevant to both his own views and to those of the other person. And so it can go on back and forth with the continual emergence of a new content that is common to both participants. Thus, in a dialogue, each person does not attempt to make common certain ideas or items of information that are already known to him. Rather, it may be said that the two people are making something in common, i.e. creating something new together. And that's a really powerful way of looking at it, I think. You aren't really able to step outside your own filters. You need someone else to be able to do that. So when you have someone else sort of stepping in with their filters, they're gonna display your thoughts back to you in a new way. And this new way is something that wouldn't have been possible without this dialogue. But of course, such communication can lead to the creation of something new only if people are able freely to listen to each other without prejudice and without trying to influence each other. Each has to be interested primarily in truth and coherence so that he is ready to drop his old ideas and intentions and be ready to go on to something different when this is called for. If, however, two people merely want to convey certain ideas or points of view to each other, as if these were items of information, then they must inevitably fail to meet. For each will hear the other through the screen of his own thoughts, which he tends to maintain and defend, regardless of whether or not they are true or coherent. The result will, of course, be just a sort of confusion that leads to the insoluble problem of communication, which has been pointed out and discussed earlier. And again, here we have something that is just so, it's even worse today than in 96, I feel. Like the internet has really accelerated this mode of communication where you just kind of yell at the other person and you sort of set out these boundaries of, okay, here's how people are supposed to act, and if they act outside these particular boundaries, then they're a Nazi or something. You really try and throw the worst possible thing at them in order to make them communicate and behave as you communicate and behave. But that just leads to people not communicating truthfully, and then the problem doesn't end. You have to start with being able to communicate truthfully to get anywhere. So, evidently, communication in the sense described above is necessary in all aspects of life. Thus, if people are to cooperate, i.e. literally to work together, they have to be able to create something in common, something that takes shape in their mutual discussions and actions, rather than something that is conveyed from one person who acts as an authority to the others, who act as passive instruments of this authority. And wow, I mean, again, I know I'm stopping so much to just reflect on how true the things that Bohm is saying here, but wow, how true is this, where in the modern world, this is sort of the dominant mode of working. Is you have someone who comes along and says, you have to do these steps in these order. You're sort of the authority, or even not necessarily these steps in these order, but the authority says you have to do the thing that makes me, the authority, the most money, instead of the workers being involved in a dialogue about what is being created. If you have the workers actively engaged in what they're working on, and if they have the power to create this dialogue and to question, is this step correct? Like, is this right? Then they have the ability to actually learn why something is being done this way. Like, even if that question has an answer, and that answer is no, you really should be doing it this way, that ability to have a dialogue is what creates a common understanding, as Bohm says. And this common understanding can be something different. It will be something different than this one authority has to say. And this different thing has more, I'm going to say, information, essentially, because it's a product of multiple viewpoints. So even in relationships with inanimate objects and with nature in general, something very like communication is involved. Consider, for example, the work of an artist. Can it be properly said that the artist is expressing himself, i.e. literally pushing outward something that is already formed inside of him? Such a description is not, in fact, generally accurate or adequate. Rather, what usually happens is that the first thing the artist does is only similar in certain ways to what he may have in mind. As in a conversation between two people, he sees the similarity and the difference, and from this perception, something further emerges in his next action. Thus, something new is continually created that is common to the artist and the material on which he is working. And I definitely feel like I've experienced this, where it's not like when you talk to someone about the thing you're working on, you sort of realize, they don't get it, and I need to adjust something here, or they really get it, and this is exciting, and now I like the things I'm saying are working, and I can continue pushing out on this particular way. So the scientist is engaged in a similar dialogue with nature, as well as his fellow human beings. Thus, when a scientist has an idea, this is tested by observation. What is found, as generally happens, that what is observed is only similar to what he had in mind and not identical. Then, from a consideration of the similarities and the differences, he gets a new idea, which is in turn tested. And so it goes, with a continual emergence of something new that is common to the thought of the scientist and what is observed in nature. This extends onward into practical activities, which lead to the creation of new structures that are common to man and to the overall environment in which he lives. Yeah, and I think the widespread artifacts that are a process of this creation that then change the overall environment, where I personally am an environment where everything has been created by that process of man going forth and building all these things that surround me. So it is clear that if we are to live in harmony with ourselves and with nature, we need to be able to communicate freely in a creative movement in which no one permanently holds to or otherwise defends his own ideas. Why then is it so difficult to actually bring about such communication? This is a very complex and subtle question, but it may perhaps be said that when one comes to do something, not merely to talk about it or think about it, one tends to believe that one already is listening to the other person in a proper way. It seems the main trouble is that the other person is the one who is prejudiced and not listening. After all, it is easy for each of us to see that other people are blocked about certain questions, so that without being aware of it, they're avoiding the confrontation of contradictions in certain ideas that may be extremely dear to them. The very nature of such a block is, however, that the very nature of such a block is, however, that it is a kind of insensitivity or anesthesia about one's own contradictions. Evidently, then, what is crucial is to be aware of the nature of one's own blocks. If one is alert and attentive, he can see, for example, that whenever certain questions arise, there are fleeting sensations of fear, which push him away from consideration of these questions and of pleasure, which attract his thoughts and cause him to be occupied with other questions. So one is able to keep away from whatever it is that he thinks may disturb him. And as a result, he can be subtly defending his own ideas when he supposes that he's really listening to what other people have to say. I don't know how you get people to accept this particular one. We're kind of in an overall time where the stakes have been raised artificially, where the assumption is that I am on the side of the good guys, and the people who don't think the way I do are evil and need to be destroyed. And so this sort of what Bohm is saying is almost quaint. People are gonna even reject this sort of meta call to be aware of these pleasure and pain of being attracted to the ideas that are like mine and pushing away the ideas that are not like mine. But I mean, I think the only way to combat that is to do things like read what we're reading here. It has to start somewhere for us to start thinking not in these very black and white terms of good and evil, but to go beyond that and to say my ideas are inconsistent with myself. I don't have access to truth alone, and it's not the case that only the people that think like me have access to truth alone. That sort of there's an inherent truth just in the way. There's an inherent truth in the way people think, because that's a product of all the experiences of their lives. And even if I disagree with the result, it's on me to be open to listening to them and to try and create this new common thing. like if you don't create that common thing, then there is never a common thing, and these differences just keep piling up until like there's violence. And if you're interested in violence not happening, which that seems pretty reasonable to me, um, you need to be actively engaging in making something common with the people that you disagree with. So, when we come together to talk, or otherwise to act in common, can each of us be aware of the subtle fear and pleasure sensations that block his ability to listen freely? Without this awareness, the injunction to listen to the whole of what is said will have little meaning. But if each of us can give full attention to what is actually blocking communication, while he is also properly attending to the content of what is communicated, then we may be able to create something new between us, something of very great significance for bringing to an end the at present insoluble problems of the individual and society. And that is the end of chapter 1. So great. I am so excited to do this. I honestly think David Bohm is probably the greatest thinker of the 21st century, and he has been totally, or 20th century. And he has been, I think, criminally underlooked. And we can talk about why that is later. There's a little bit on the introductions in this collection of essays I have. So I think, I mean, it's just, in reading Bohm, I cannot believe how prescient he is. I cannot believe like how well he speaks to this current time. And I'm really excited to try and bring that out a little more. So yeah, all right, cool. Thanks for watching.